As always, our show is sponsored by Memoria Press. You can find our curriculum at memoriapress.com.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm sitting with Paul, Tanya, and a special guest, Michelle Tefertiller. In the last few episodes, we've talked a lot about books and literature, and that was a lot of fun, but school is starting again, and so I think that one of the things on everyone's mind right now is the space that they are now inhabiting. It's those first couple of weeks, whether you're in a school or homeschool, where you start thinking, you're looking at the walls, trying to figure out where everything should go, critiquing the teacher's decisions, those kinds of things. And I think that we have strong opinions about how a space should look, and it really flows from our core ideas about a traditional education. However, before we get there, I want to ask you guys, it's been a little while, and Michelle, it's been never for you that I've asked you.
No one cares.
I care.
Okay.
Michelle, what are you reading right now?
So Shane, I'm reading Don Quixote with our Memoria Press book club, and I think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been times where I have laughed out loud. In fact, before Tanya started, we were on a trip, and I said, start reading it. You're going to think it's funny.
The airplane. We were in the plane.
We were in the plane, and then we were at the pool.
Yes, but in the plane, I mean, we
would be laughing.
We were reading just the setup. I was reading, Michelle had already read it, but I was reading just that first setup where he's just literally lost his mind over these books he's read, and how he had this cardboard visor or something, and I was just in hysterics. I mean, tears were pouring down my face, and Michelle, I don't know what that woman beside me thought, because it was the three of us, and then Michelle got tickled because she had already read it, and so we were, and I would just look at every two paragraphs, I would just break into absolute hysteria over it. So what am I reading? Don Quixote, because we're reading together.
Spanish or English?
And I'm reading it in English, but I feel like this is a really good translation.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about it, but I feel like all her notes are really good. And so I don't know, it just feels good to me, like we've chosen the right translator. And I'm really enjoying it too. But I don't know, the second half, I mean, it's like, you have to read 500 pages to get through the first part. And then there's 10 years in between when he wrote the second part before there was a second part. So they kind of stand alone.
Yeah.
But
I think you could stop after the first part.
One of the part, now I haven't finished the second part because I got into the second part,
Right.
and then we decided to do it all together, and I decided to stop and wait for y'all to catch up and pass me. But
Right.
I felt like the second part was one of the most interesting parts of it, because Cervantes has to basically defend himself of being
Because there was an
actual
imposter
author.
book.
Yes.
There was an imposter book that came out.
Oh, wait a minute. Now you're getting ahead. Spoiler alert, people.
Well, you need to know this background. Like
years,
before I started reading it, I went and watched a YouTube video of a guy who's like, "Here's what you need to know before you start reading." And that was one of the things he said was you had to know that there was a 10-year break between parts 1 and 2. And Cervantes, in that 10-year break, somebody else published a book posing to be Cervantes. And so the second part, like, you're kind of clueless if you don't realize that. But they're constantly referring to like this Don Quixote who's not me, right? And it's that was one of the funniest parts.
It is fun. It is good. And there are notes that explain all of that when you get there.
Yeah. But I think, talking about the translation, I mean, for a good translation, you want it to be well done in English as well. And I think this one.
I do too. I really do.
So Shane, I had started reading Nicholas and Alexandra just a few weeks before we got our copies of Don Quixote, and I got about 3 chapters into that and realized that I can't do both of those at the same time.
That book.
I love it too, but
It was good.
Have
you read Nicholas and Alexandra?
No.
It was one of Cheryl's favorite books. She wanted it in our literature curriculum, and our teachers kept saying, "This isn't literature, this is history." But she loved it so much, and there was no place for it in history. So she was like, "We'll just stick it in lit." But she finally said, "I'm going to have to take it out because the teachers just don't want to teach it."
So for those of us who haven't read it, yeah.
What is it? Russian? What
it is? It's literally about the Tsar Nicholas. I don't know if the second, maybe, I can't remember, and his wife and their dynasty and the fall of it, and they're the ones who got arrested and their children shot in front of them.
Anastasia's parents.
Yes, I think
it
was I mean, it's brutal, but I thought it was really good.
It's
I only read it because I knew she wanted me to read it.
It's on the HLS reading list. That's where I found the title.
Oh, for
and
high
it's on
schoolers?
Martin's list, his book list.
What? Which one?
Well, one of the many.
There are so many.
One of the many.
What are you reading?
Well, I've been recently reading a book by Eugene Peterson. I don't know if you all have ever heard of him.
Yes, he's a theologian, right?
Yes, Christian writer. He's a book on Jeremiah called Running with the Horses, which is a quote from Jeremiah 15. So I've really been enjoying that book. I've been rereading Magician's Nephew and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I'm in like chapter 11 of Magician's Nephew because we have an upcoming conversation, which in the publication order, I don't know if this episode will come out first or second, but we're going to be talking about Narnia again on this episode. And so I was prepping for that and reading Magician's Nephew. I'm pretty deep into that. And then I'm about 2/3 of the way through Troy by Stephen Fry, which is a kind of a modern retelling of Greek mythology, and it's really good.
Is it?
But I'm kind of obsessed with Greek mythology and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and so it kind of scratches that itch for me. It's really just a very clear and mildly entertaining retelling of the stories, but a very, very clear, I think, which is helpful.
Have you read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology book?
Not.
I'm curious how those match up, like if they're very similar. I enjoyed the Norse mythology one.
But on our last road trip, Michelle and I actually listened through all of Dellar's Greek myths on audio because it had been a while since I'd read it. And we had exactly 5 hours or something. And it was just perfect that we could read the whole thing on audio. And we did.
Do you think this Stephen Fry one, are the stories the same?
Yeah.
Or are they different?
I think so. He makes some choices because, there are differing versions of a lot of the stories. And so he's definitely making choices here and there, but I think he sticks pretty close to the main storylines that come down, and he sticks close to the Iliad.
That reminds me of years ago when when those books came out.
Percy Jackson.
Those Percy Jackson books came out, and I just, that's not a genre that I enjoy, and so I made Paul read them. Because people kept asking us about them. Were they bad? Were they okay? Is it okay for my children to read? And, you can't answer that question until you've read them. So I was like, hey, Paul, want to read some books?
I think because I remember reading the Greek ones and then Roman ones, even going on to the Egyptian, which nobody asked us about, but it was very fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So moving on from what we've been reading, there's a lot of people who are a little stressed right now because they have just gone back to school. So whether they're teachers, students. So one way I think that you can address some of that stress is through place, right? You can have an ordered environment. That's something that flows from our kind of idea about a traditional classroom. Tanya, that's just one benefit of prioritizing an ordered environment for learning. What are some of the reasons why you would advocate that people who are thinking about their classrooms right now, about their homeschool kind of environment where the students are doing learning, what are the reasons that people should be intentional and thoughtful about ordering their learning space?
The big thing about it is just not to have the distraction on your walls or in your space, that it needs to be simple so that you are focused on the curriculum, especially with not so much really young students as much as by grammar school. You need to keep them focused. And that's really the main reason we would say they need a place to rest their eyes, especially in a classroom situation. The wall where the teacher is speaking from needs to be as minimal as possible so that the teacher is the center of everything. At home, if you have a schoolroom, it's the same thing. We started with a schoolroom, finally ended up at the dining room table. So no way was I going to put charts and things up in my dining room. So I did very minimal things then. And really I just never really took the time to put things up. But in my classroom, you've got all those walls and it's that dedicated space. That's all it is. At that point, I would have put more on the walls if allowed than I did, just because you think, oh, this is relevant. Because we say only put up the things that are relevant. Well, everything could be relevant. Every grammar rule that you teach, every punctuation rule, every map for every subject that you teach, everything that you do could be relevant. And I go in classrooms now And I look around and I think, what is really relevant here? All of it's good. Unless this cartoony stuff I just cannot deal with. Or just a bunch of proverbs on the board. Once the students have seen those, they don't really see them anymore. It just takes up space. But the maps that you really need should be up. And your grammar, like your Latin grammar charts, I had them up at the beginning because I needed to. The kids needed them. But then I took them down whenever they memorized them because then they become a crutch. Or we'd have a quiz and I'd forget to take them down. And my students are so honest. They would raise their hands and tell me that the charts were up. So I'd have to go turn them around then. But, the things like that was relevant. I was teaching those forms and they needed to be up there. We were reciting them every day till they mastered them. So that kind of decision, I just think for years I've said, only have up the things that are relevant. And now I look around classrooms and think, well, you could say that all of this is relevant.
Sure.
So you really just have to change it up. It may be relevant this month, but maybe it's not relevant next month. Or maybe my students have mastered that. So why do I still have it up there?
Sure. Yeah. Michelle, same question. What are some of the other benefits or reasons why you would advocate a more minimal classroom and being thoughtful about classroom decor?
Well, basically, when I think about the students that I usually work with, the younger students, it makes me think of the difference between the atmosphere at a child's birthday party and the atmosphere for a classroom. If you're at a child's birthday party, it's great to have things dangling from the ceiling, all of these bright colors and every, games and everything all around the walls. But when you go into a classroom, you want your alphabet line, maybe a hundreds chart, and some calendar material. Beyond that, you don't need a lot, even in the primary grades. You don't need charts that say spring is here. The kindergartners can't read that. You don't need the grammar rules. They can't read those. The parts of speech, they're learning to blend A and T and make the word at. They don't need to have the nouns and the description of all the parts of speech on the walls. They just need very minimal tools. They do need more tools than, say, a sixth grader would need.
The primary classrooms are definitely, their walls are definitely busier than a grammar school classroom should be. And that's okay. And at home, you just don't really.
You need an alphabet line. I feel like you need an alphabet line.
You do need the alphabet.
For the first year, at least for kindergarten. And then you might need it for a poster for first grade that shows manuscript and cursive so they can see the differences. Mm-hmm. But really, there are very few things that really you need on your walls.
We keep the cursive up because, it's a big deal to us.
Right. Paul, same question.
Oh, good. I was hoping I got the same question because I want to wax philosophical on this.
Good.
I think when we...
Are we not waxing philosophical?
No,
I thought I was very philosophical.
You're very practical.
Oh.
Okay.
But they were talking about wise choices, and they love making those wise choices. And
philosophy
is the love of wisdom.
Those are very wise choices.
Take it back.
I think that when we're talking about learning environments, we're talking about, being in a classroom or in some space where we're trying to learn. What are we trying to do? We're trying to use our head. And we often like to prioritize our reason over the very fact that we have a body. And so we like to sort of say, well, we want to throw everything at that reason that we can, whether it's those grammar parts of speech and all that stuff. We think that's all going to help us in our exercise of rationality without realizing, but wait, like I have arms and legs and eyes that actually can get saturated. Because we think of this reason as something that's sort of infinite. We're just trying to shove stuff in there. And I think it's important that we think about the fact that we have a body, right? And this is why, schools that even, HLS, we prioritize the academics, but we still have recess. We still have PE. Why? Because we have a body. We still have sports. Why? Because we have a body. You've got to think about the whole, and the recognition of the learning environment is a recognition that we're not angels or spirits that are only thinking about our intellect, but we're also thinking about what does it mean to be in a space physically while we are trying to do that learning.
Seems like the argument you're making is similar to what some people would say when they're talking about church buildings. Like a reason why a church building maybe ought to be beautiful is because we have bodies and that there's something physical about our experience in that place, and that there's some buildings that reflect our attention to God and there are others that do not. In the same way, maybe a learning environment, there's some that direct us towards the goal and there's others that do not.
Yes. Yeah.
And Cheryl always said you couldn't have a classical school in an ugly building. And she went to visit some church with Brian. I mean, this is 20 years ago when we were out of space at Crescent Hill. And she went to visit a church with him, and it was a big church. And it would have been the perfect space for us because they had plenty of space. And they were interested in renting. And they came back, and I was really excited because I thought we're finally going to have enough space. And I said, well, what did you think? And she said, it looked like a casino. You can't have a classical school in a casino. And it was just off the table.
So I want to take you guys back. All three of you have been teachers. Two of the three of you have been homeschool mothers as well. When you were coming to this time of the year, and probably for at least you two, this was months ago, you were thinking about this?
Oh, yeah. That's what I was, when you started and said, everybody's nervous now. The nervousness is over if you've started school. You're there. You've done it.
Well, some of us.
Okay. I feel like your wife will be well prepared, even if you haven't thought about it.
That's true. That is exactly right. So I want to ask you, Michelle, go back, think about when you were preparing your class. What were the things that you were thinking about? What were the things that you particularly liked? I think it might be helpful just to share a personal experience of this is how I decorated the classroom. This is how I chose certain things. And yeah, anything you remember from when you were setting up your class the first time, whether homeschool or school or both.
Right. So my first classroom was kind of scarring because I didn't have carpet in my room until the day of Meet the Teacher. So we don't want to go back that far, and most of my color decisions were dictated by the color of my walls because my color was this beautiful purple color that was chosen for me. It's beautiful. It was chosen for me, but it's hard to find things to coordinate with that. So you do want to be mindful of colors and make sure your colors coordinate with whatever your wall color is. But I just basically wanted to make sure I had all of the calendar stuff that I needed, but not too much, which is a hard trick. I wanted to have a space in my room where I could display student work. And so I had an area dedicated to that. I had my alphabet lineup, and everything else was bookshelves and just student desks. I mean, there really was not a lot on my walls. Cheryl always said, as Tanya had mentioned earlier, you have to have a blank areas where the student's eyes can rest. And so the front of my room just had the big whiteboard and the alphabet chart.
So I get asked this a decent amount from admin teams when they're thinking about this and trying to create a school culture, and they'll ask, how much should be left up to the individual teacher? One's question like, should a school allow a teacher to, or is it best practices for the teacher to have a large influence in deciding what color the walls are going to be in their room? What do you think about that?
I don't think it really matters. I think you can find something good to go with any color that's chosen for you.
But I don't know that you want the teachers to make that individual decision.
Yeah, because then you'd have different rooms, different colors, and you have some teachers that are been in some very lovely rooms that look just like a living room. They had little cute quotes on the board about comfort and home and things like that. And there was no, other than the alphabet line, there's no academics, but there was a lot of extra things in there that didn't need to be in there. I'm not saying diffusers are bad, but the rooms where you have a diffuser and you have
where it is like a living room.
It's like a living room and it's beautiful, but
yeah, what's wrong with having a living room, Michelle?
No, I don't know that there's anything wrong with it, but I think we need to separate the feel of home from the feel of a classroom.
But I mean, that goes back to that article Cheryl wrote about gravitas in the primary school or something like that. Mm-hmm. And just, how, I remember her making the point that our kindergarten at Highlands is 2 days a week because that's enough to get it done. But if you go much longer, then all of a sudden you're entertaining the kids because you have to have filler time rather than it. But what we want is them to always feel that at school, this is a place where we work.
Just like if I put dorm lights around my computer. It just wouldn't be professional. And this school is the students' jobs now. And it's serious and needs to be treated seriously.
Paul, it sounds like
dorm lights.
Well, I think she's saying.
Oh,
they're
those little
beautiful.
strings of
like
lights,
LED
and you
strings.
put them all over the place.
I think
I've seen that.
I
I'm
got
gonna
an
put some up on
Amazon
my-
order
Paul,
coming.
she's implying
Well,
don't put the lava lamp out.
That is
You're gonna
exactly
get
what I'm
fired.
implying. Just, professional work environment, professional classroom.
Yeah, it seems like both of you are getting at the fact that our goal, our purpose is what informs our culture. And if you make decisions that don't enforce that purpose and that mission, you lose sight of it. And that happens even with choices you make about your environment that you're in.
Right. And people, think that because we're a curriculum company, that we are mainly concerned with curriculum. But I think we're equally as concerned with the culture, the pedagogy, all of that is part of the classical mindset. What are we after? Beauty.
Mm.
And so we can't have beauty if it looks like the parent-teacher store threw up in your classroom.
So Tanya, take us back. What about you? You taught sixth grade for a while.
I taught fifth and sixth.
Fifth and sixth.
So I had these medieval knights up one year.
A whole suit of armor.
The armor,
Life
like
size?
it pointed out. They were big posters, but I took those down. I literally ended up with and I was sharing with the Sunday school room too, which did make a difference.
Sure.
But they were so nice about whatever we put up. They were fine with whatever we put on the walls. We weren't like some schools that have to take everything down, which is an awful place to be. But sometimes, you have to start like that. And so by fifth and sixth grades, I had very little Latin charts as needed. And I had to have the cursive up because every time Cheryl walked in my classroom, she looked to see if my kids were using the correct pencil grip and walked around looking at their cursive. So that was up. And then I would put, how like the maps for famous men of Greece or famous men of the Middle Ages or Christian studies would be different. So I would just put them on the whiteboard with the magnets. Oh, and I taught birds and trees. So we had one time we had these silhouettes of birds up that the kids could see if they could identify the silhouette. So that was up all year, and they would spend a lot of time there. And Cheryl put some tree things up. She taught trees for me because she loved them. So, but it was very minimal because she forced it to be minimal. And at home, I really didn't. We used my kids' playroom as a schoolroom. So I really didn't. They had their individual desks and their workspace that I kept as neat and clean as possible. But really, I never made it a whole year with them with individual desks. I just did better at the dining room table with them on either side of me.
Sure.
It just worked better for us because then I could just handle both of them at the same time.
Yeah. So there is flexibility in finding what is the best way to keep them on task.
Yes,
right?
and I
That's
think
the goal
I've
for you.
already said, that I let my kids do school in their pajamas. But I was thinking about that. Did you let your kids do school in their pajamas? Yes, well.
No, never.
I was thinking about that. And I think, I always hybrid homeschooled. So they were always in class 2 days a week. And so I'm thinking if they were home 5 days, would I have let them have school in their pajamas? Maybe not.
Oh.
But I thought they wore uniforms 2 days. So sometimes they'd put shorts and a t-shirt on because it was nice weather and they'd go outside. But honestly, that's just something that I just think if I had to do that again, we'd be dressed.
Were you in your pajamas?
No, I was fully dressed.
That provokes an important question, and that is, if you're not going to allow Paul to have his lava lamp, will you at least let him come to work in his pajamas if he's more effective?
I won't, though. I won't.
Okay. Sorry.
It was a mistake I made. I think it was a mistake. I think that, they would have been more serious maybe if they'd been dressed. Some homeschoolers put their kids in uniforms, and I can see that. When I look, this is our first week of school, and I look around outside. Today's a cottage school day and a full-time school day, and all those kids look so nice, and they look so professional. And so why would you put them in a classroom that looks cartoony when we've dressed them up and said, this is business, this is your business?
Yeah, even the 2-day-a-week kids look just as sharp.
That's
as
right. They do.
Yep.
They do. They look great.
Well, and Shane and I were talking the other day about sort of this topic, and I was thinking about it when I was homeschooled.
Did y'all prep ahead of time and we didn't get
No.
Well,
We just
I invited
talked
you
for
to the
about 30
pre-production
seconds.
meeting, but you were too busy.
You did not. Pre-production.
No, but he sparked a couple of ideas in my mind. One, which was about this thing about getting up and getting ready. And I was trying to remember how we did it when I was homeschooled, and we lived 5 minutes from the church, and Mom would like to get to church, a couple days a week. And I think it was like at 8:30. And so it meant that we got up, we would walk to church, we'd be there for half an hour.
So you were dressed.
So we were dressed,
Yep.
and then we'd come home and we would, eat a quick breakfast and get started at 9:15. But then what that also did, I think, in hindsight, and I don't know, maybe my family could contradict me, but this is the way I remember it, was that then the other days it meant that we got started by 9 or 9:15. But it was also like, okay, the expectation was you got dressed because you you were regularly getting up and getting dressed for church anyway. And so it was a mechanism by which it forced a little bit of formality.
And I do think that's a key part, is to have this structured routine. I think that's about as important as anything.
Sure.
Because if you don't have that, it could be 11 and you haven't even started yet and your kids are running around, because that would be really easy to do at home.
Right.
Now in the classroom, even in the classroom, even our administrators are constantly saying, your morning work can take no more than 15 minutes. Our opening assembly will be finished at 5 till 8. Students will be in their desks at 8. Morning work will take no more than 10 to 15 minutes to get everybody unpacked and settled down, especially those younger guys. And you have to move. You have to move into your first subject.
Sure.
Because even that can be...
it's harder to get going than it is to stay going.
Yes.
So, Paul, let's address the elephant in the room. And that is, you're the director of the online academy. And so your students have a digital space, not really a real space. So do you really believe in the importance of a learning environment and a learning space?
I would not be spending what we spend on Adobe Connect if I didn't care about the digital environment. I mean, it's hugely important. I mean, not to go off on that tangent, but it's the one platform that I'm aware of that I can control what the student sees on the screen and exactly how they see it. And it's worth us spending the money to be able to make that happen. And so, and I'm constantly, this is something that we reiterate to teachers again and again and again. When you set up your webcam, you need to think about what's behind you. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So they're not worried about, in some ways, you think about a brick and mortar classroom, you're thinking about what is the student seeing, right? You're just thinking about what's in front of them. But in the online setting, we have to think about what's behind you, right? And that you as a teacher, you need your dedicated space, your space where your kids aren't going to open a door and run in and disrupt the class, or your background should not be your bed in your bedroom, things like that. That just to create that environment, because the kids are seeing your presentation, your slideshow, your document, whatever, and they're seeing your face, and so that your face and what's behind it is indicative to the students about how much they ought to care about how professional this endeavor is, and so we've put a lot of work into that, and also even just the course page, right? So if we want our if we're asking for order and structure in the way the learning environment is, well, then the course page should be easily navigable. Is that a word? Navigable?
It is navigable.
And it should be beautiful, right? There's always, and that's the thing, there's always more we want to do there, but that's a key thing to it, but hopefully the things that we do trickle over into, our students actually getting out of their pajamas in the morning. Now, granted, we have students that will be taking classes at 3 a.m. their local time, which is because they're on the other side of the world, but they want it so bad. Right now, if they're in their pajamas, I'll give that
That's right.
I'll give that a pass.
My goodness.
And it's amazing. Their dedication is absolutely amazing. But I bet you those kids are not in their pajamas.
They may not be.
Pajama bottoms only, maybe.
Well, that was the thing when we had during COVID, the couple months that we were on Zoom and the kids had to be in their uniforms on Zoom, just to continue that formality. And I think Cooper, Ryan's son Cooper, was he was barefoot, I think. And the teacher had him stand up and you could see his bare feet because he thought he'd be safe under that desk.
No.
I'm curious, Paul, if your students that have a dedicated space for their work or the ones who work at their desk in their bedroom, if there's a difference. We don't have necessarily that data because we don't get that from every parent about what's doing it. So there's a couple things. One is I was thinking I would like to have all of my students to be like Harry Potter and have their space under the stairs. And we do tell families that, if your student needs some place where they can sit there and engage in the online class without their siblings, being super disruptive, around them. Now, some families, where we've had an instance, say, of cheating, and they've said, okay, this was something where we were letting our child take their classes in their room or do their assignments in their room, and we are moving them out to the dining room table. That's just good practice with internet, regardless, is that it be in a common place. And you can't trust, unfortunately. I'm thrilled that families trust us to the degree that they do, but sometimes they're like, well, they're taking an MP class, therefore I don't have to worry about what they're doing on the internet. And they could be doing a whole slew of other things while the class is going on. And so being in that public place, so a place that can be supervised, but a place that's not distracting is sort of the ideal location. And so I don't have a good mechanism on that, but you can tell the difference in quality of work by and large, anecdotally, if we have a student that's struggling a lot, not every time, but there's a significant amount of time where, okay, this just hasn't been presented to the student as this is an academic professional endeavor, not just, you're getting on and watching Netflix. On your sofa.
It seems to come back to Tanya's initial point that really what we're going for is a place that doesn't have distraction. And really that's what you're also saying is that even though we have this digital environment, how can we try to find the place with the least amount of distraction? It's not really an aesthetic point at that point. It's more about our function and our goal.
Right. And it's small stuff too. Like we would rather a kid not take the class on a tablet or a phone. Technically they could, the technology's there,
right?
But what are tablets and phones used for? What's the default assumption the student's going to go to and say, I'm picking this up and I'm going to do something with it, right? We're going to play a game or we're going to watch a movie, right? And so we'd rather them be at a desktop, which is typically a more professional thing.
Right.
So I want each of you to put on your head of school hat or headmistress of homeschool hat or head of online school hat, and you get the critique or the pushback when you say, I think this decoration is corny. And you say it should come down. It's not minimal. It could be distracting. And the person responds and says, well, I think that this is an expression of who I am, and it helps me to be the best version of the teacher that I can be. And I think it makes this space beautiful, and I think it's helping our students to engage, which I think is kind of generally what someone who is putting something like that up is thinking when they do it. How do you respond? What is the way to coach younger teachers, younger families in this journey of education towards embracing a more minimal, focused view of classroom space?
Well, for the youngest grades, it's hard because we are able to get all of our content done in 2 days at the model school
for
here for kindergarten. And so when you can get all of that content done in 2 days and you try to spread it out over 5, and most programs are 5-day programs, they need something to fill their other time. So what I would say is whereas I would never say centers or play areas in the classroom are appropriate, there are some schools that can't avoid those because they have time that they need to fill in the afternoons. And so that one is very hard. I would say that when you get to first grade, second grade, you will not have time for those areas. Junior kindergarten, if they're a 5-day program, they're going to need some other things to fill their time.
So you'd really say that you'd want to kind of isolate use of time. Like how is this, decor, or how is it related to an educational goal? And sometimes that's going to be easier if you have more narrow educational goals, 2 days of programming versus 5 or 4.
Correct. And if you're at home on your 2 days and your work is done, send them outside. Mm-hmm. There's so many other things they can do. There's so many other activities that you can do and that I could think of than spending time in a play kitchen where they can do that at home. But the biggest problem for the younger schools is most of the parent-teacher store materials are marketed to the younger grades. So you have some very fun and interesting things like all of the Dr. Seuss. I love Dr. Seuss. Can I just say that? But there are all these Dr. Seuss things that are just distracting. And I don't know how a student, when I'm in those classrooms that have all of the Dr. Seuss all over everywhere and Cat in the Hat is hanging from the ceiling, I'm already nervous and wondering, where should I look first? And I don't want to pay attention to the teacher. What she's saying is hard.
When your classroom looks like a Richard Scarry book. And I love Richard Scarry. But
the Richard Scarry's books always made me nervous because there was so much going on. And I wanted to see everything. And you can't see everything in a Richard Scarry book. So, if you have a lot of time, you could, but it's just, you need to be purposeful about what is your intention? What do you want the students doing? Because if you want their focus to be on, after lunch, we get to play in the kitchen, then have the kitchen set up. But if you want the students focused on, this letter that makes this sound, and when I blend those two sounds together, I get a word. And how exciting is that? Because one day I'll read the books on that shelf right there. It's a different setup.
Sure. Tanya, what about you?
For the teacher that really wants to show creativity in the classroom, I would say that's not our culture. And it's got to go. I understand that you love this. I like it too. But it doesn't belong in the classroom. And it's not who we are. What you do in your own home, that's great. Same thing with, with the way we treat our students. So maybe at home you've got a looser environment and it's just not in you, in your personality to make your students raise their hands or to keep a quiet classroom. Well, that's a problem because that's not who we are. And it's not fair to the teacher that worked really hard to train those students who came before you, or for the teacher that now in the next year has to bring it back to who we are. So I think the important thing is that the school has a culture and that they know what their identity is and that everybody has to buy into that. And it doesn't mean that you can't be who you are, but it does mean that there are certain things that, just like in a job, if you put a lava lamp at your desk, I'm going to have something to say about it. And
I actually have changed the decor behind my desk like 4 times
gosh,
because of things you've said.
Because of what Tanya has said.
Yes, he had. Well, now that well, that's because I'm on Zoom calls with you and just see the ridiculousness behind your head. Well, one time it was a parody of us.
But you couldn't tell that on the Zoom call.
Tell.
I could though, Paul. I could.
You could decorate the door. I feel like the outside of the door or something. I mean, I don't know.
Well, then it messes with your culture too.
Oh, it messes with the hall, I guess.
When you've got, you've got families coming through that want to know who you are, and do I want my child here? It's got to be consistent.
Yeah.
It's gotta be
that was going to be the major thing I was going to bring up was consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you have to go tell a teacher, I don't think this belongs, depending on what it is, it may be something where you say, well, why don't you come over here and see the next grade up? And this is what these kids are going to need to be ready for. And so let's look at what the culture you need to be working to prepare them for. And that's why I'm asking you to take it down, and gives them a little bit of a reason for that. You also showed me a motivational poster this morning.
Is that behind your desk now?
No, he wants behind my desk.
Yeah.
And I think, an answer, and goes to like, what kind of thing are you talking about? Is it a poster? Is it a diffuser? Is it is it things hanging from the ceiling? Your response is going to change. But if it's a motivational poster, you say, well, I don't think everybody's motivated by the same things. And what we're really wanting them to be motivated by is truth, beauty, and goodness. And those things are going to shine out in the curriculum. And it doesn't need to be posted on the wall telling them,
And in the way we treat each
they
other.
need to be enthusiastic,
The other thing we didn't talk about is some schools have more than one grade level teacher. So you might have 2 kindergarten classes. And if you don't have if one kindergarten class is where the parent-teacher store exploded, and the other follows along our recommendations of being a more modest classroom, there's going to be a difference in when you walk in the room in the way the students are. I've seen it myself.
And their achievement.
Their achievement at the end. You don't sometimes see that till the end of the year, but eventually there is an achievement difference.
Really practical example of this is I think the first year that my wife was teaching for Jason Bora at Crescent Hill, she does a lot of hand lettering, which is like writing fancy things on paper and such. She had hand lettered all the students' names, but her particular hand letter that she had chosen didn't capitalize any of the letters.
Oh, no.
So it was lowercase. And so Mr. Bora reprimanded her, as he should, and said, please hand letter these with capital letters. And her being a sweet lady, it was like, oh, of course. And she fixed it. But that little thing, small decision, where what Emily is thinking is just, how do I make this beautiful? And what Mr. Borger is thinking is, how does everything have an educational purpose in this room? It sends a message from the start where it's like, it can be beautiful, but let's not lose the focus here. And that, I think, was an interesting example.
It would have been inconsistent to tell the students, you need to capitalize first words, proper nouns, and turn around and not have that on
And the
their
teacher has
thing.
not done it. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed this conversation with you guys. I hope that you enjoy the beginning of this school year.
Oh, I'm just loving that they're back.
Yeah.
Now we just need everybody else to be back and have all of their books, and life will be good again.
And MPOA doesn't start till September 12th. So there's,
Oh gosh, people are still buying books.
yes, you can still jump in a class if you haven't started.
And on that commercial, we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Classical Etc. If you'd like to show your support for the show, then you can leave a like below. If you'd like to add your voice to the conversation, then you can comment. And if you want to follow along with us on this journey, then please subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you later.